Whether or not a political solution will happen in Syria, or whether it's going to be a transition with the regime and key military actors, is a very hard question that we have been grappling with for a few years. As you know, the fifth round of the Geneva talks has just happened with no clear outcomes and no promises of a political solution or any transition or accountability still visible. But what I can tell you as civil society organizations and as civil society, that no matter what the political solution is for Syria, our role as civil society is to make sure that there are certain rights, the rights of the people that we are speaking for, that we see every day on the field, that will be guaranteed whatever a political solution that happens. We want to see a clear transition and accountability for people to believe again in the system, because at the moment a lot of people have lost faith and lost hope, completely demoralized. It's like history has been repeating itself for a few years. Even if a political solution happens and we have a transition and we have a social democracy in place and reconstruction starts, we have a big concern as civil society as to who are the people who will be voting, what Syria will be then, who will be guaranteeing these rights for the people. Will people be able to voluntarily return? If people return, will they all have the equal rights to vote? And who are we expecting to vote? The illiterate or the wounded, or those who have been without official papers, or the stateless? Because as you know, we have so many births that are now unaccounted for, and people who are even identityless. So as civil society actors who are expected to be non-politically vested, but who will be there to ensure the rights of the people, we will be closely watching and monitoring, but not only our role as watching and monitoring, but we also request to be there at the table. Yes, we have been present in political discussions, in international conferences. We have been pushing for our space in these arenas. However, until today, we are just there often as a tokenistic presence, as an ad hoc person on the table invited. So we really would like to reiterate the fact that we are key players, we are the guarantors for people's rights, we are the watchdogs and the people who will ensure that both opposition and regime and all parties will do what is best actually for the Syrian people. So as you may know, in 2011, the Syrian parliament voted on a decree called Decree 107, which has given more power to local governance structures to implement development projects and to support them financially, to have a decentralization in service provision and decision making. Now, it's true that a few days ago the government has issued an amendment saying that actually the governors will be appointed by Damascus, but still this Decree 107 still provides a very good starting point of a decentralized infrastructure, if you may, for the local governance structure to continue their work, which has already been happening, as we have seen in a lot of opposition areas and Kurdish areas. We've seen that happen through the local coordination committees who have been providing water, sanitation, infrastructure provisions for the people. They are a very legitimate source of power operating on the ground. They are the most legitimate, actually, because they are voted by the people in these regions wherever that has been possible. However, to say that decentralization will just occur when a political transition happens, and to wait for it to happen on its own is a little bit, optimistic, because as much as we like it to be bottom-up, a bottom-up approach towards governance, we do need a top-down political agreement and a transition that is clearly guaranteeing the rights of local coordination committees, guaranteeing the rights of grassroots activists who have been the inspiration for the Syrian people, who have been doing the bulk of the work on the ground. So we do need any political agreement to guarantee this possibility. The Decree 107 is a good starting point, because it's positively viewed both by the regime and the opposition. So it's a very good starting point. It's a very important infrastructure of a common legal framework and a common, a governance framework. Because as much as we want there to be decentralization and contextualization of governance, we don't want to see what happened in Iraq happen again in Syria, which is a total loss of state institution. We want one Syria. We want a strong Syria. We want a strong common legal framework governing the country. And then if we have that, then there will be ability for us to talk about decentralization in better forms.
Well, this proposal was, Turkey was trying to kind of put different model on the table than the model that it thinks that the U.S. has, which is to work with the SDF to take the Raqqa. The talks in the U.S. and Washington's, well, once the Raqqa is taken, then the stabilization politics will be conducted by the Arab component of the SDF. I think Turkey will not have much problem with the Arab component of the SDF, but Turkey is very much concerned about the PYD component of the SDF, which is the YPG, which is the backbone of the SDF. So this proposal of bringing like these Arab tribes as a counter proposal to what US has, seems it hasn't gained a lot of traction in the US, and therefore Turkey is not very happy with how the progress has been done vis-a-vis the Raqqa operation, because the U.S., the picture that Turkey gets, the U.S. is adamant to work with the SDF and is not paying attention to Turkey's concerns regarding the PYD. So at this stage, I think Turkey feels that it has less and less leverage vis-a-vis the U.S. and limited option when it comes to influence the U.S. decision on how to take the Raqqa and afterward how to stabilize it. Well, Turkey doesn't. Turkey previously used to have a Syria policy, a whole Syria, which was, it had a say on the southern Syria, on the northern Syria, on Damascus area. But more and more, as the nature of the crisis has evolved in Syria, as most of the Turkey's previous allies, from the US to some of the European countries and the Gulf countries, has lessened their commitment to the bigger Syrian policy and the picture, and particularly to the idea of the regime change, Turkey also has adapted its foreign policy to this new reality. It downsized its ambitions in Syria, and it downsized the geographical space of its foreign policy in Syria. Now, previously Turkey had a Syria policy, but now Turkey have a northern Syrian policy. Actually, Turkey's regional policy extends from northern Syria to northern Iraq. And the issue that is grappling with the most in this area is the PKK-PYD. And the countries that it is grappling with here is Iran, because Turkey feels that Iran is getting quite significant influence in the countries that is surrounding it, both in Iraq and Syria. Turkey tried to curtail it. And the third one is to lessen the negative security externalities of this crisis on Syria, particularly along its border. This is more or less what the Turkey's Syria policy is. In fact, it is Turkey's northern Syria policy. Well, Turkey's growing relation with Turkey's improvement of relation with Russia should not be exaggerated. I wouldn't say this a dramatic improvement. There is some kind of compartmentalized transactional relations that is taking place, but nevertheless, the trouble between Turkish-Russian relations are still there. They still have very different strategic view of the crisis in Syria and what should be the end game in Syria as well too. And actually not only in Syria, they have very different stance on many other issues in the Middle East, in Balkans, in Central Asia. So therefore, I don't think that the Turkish-Russian relation can ever be a substitute for Turkish-American relation. And actually, one of the reasons that Turkey has improved its relation with Russia, Turkey tried to establish relation with Russia, was as a result of Turkey's exasperation with the U.S. on Syria particularly. And I know that there is unhappiness in U.S. with Turkey as well too, but there is very significant unhappiness within Turkey vis-a-vis the U.S. too. Turkey feels that the U.S. does not take into account its interests when formulating its foreign policy towards Syria. It has progressively reduced the Syrian crisis to that of war on terror, and it's not taking into account the nation's security challenges that it is facing. But I would not, despite all this trouble between Turkey and the U.S., despite all this trouble between Turkey and U.S. relation, Russia is not a strategic partner, is not even an ally in Syria. I think the Astana process that was initiated by Turkey and Russia is reflective of the Russian agenda, not that of Turkish agenda. Turkey went along with the Astana process with the hope that this process will provide some breathing space and time for the opposition. But nevertheless, the Astana process is a Russian-led, is a Russian-framed agenda, and it served the Russian agenda very well. Russia had this international PR opportunity, depicting itself not only a decisive partner in the war, but also a peacemaker in the Syrian crisis. And Russia tried to design the political process, but also design the opposition's composition as well too. It brought the issue of constitution before the issue of the political transition. All of these were against the Turkey's declared goals. So in this regard, Turkish-Russian relations, yes, it is better now than it was a year ago, but I think the fact that Russia came immediately to the aid of YPG when there was the Turkish threat that after the Al-Bab, Turkey will turn its firepower on the YPG. The fact that Russia cut a deal with regime, brought the regime to Manbij, and also brought some of its soldiers to Manbij, and then to the Afrin, shows that despite the public appearances, either one party or both parties are not happy with the state of relation between the two countries.